Good morning. Welcome on this beautiful, here in Chicago, sunny Sunday. And if you're not here, I totally get it. But I'm glad to be here. My name is Katie Merrill, and I'm a longtime member of the Ethical Humanist Society of Chicago, and I will be the moderator today. For those of you who are not familiar, the Ethical Society is a community of volunteers who pitch in to make all these things happen. So I'm volunteer, judge me on that standard. And the AV guys are all volunteers. We're doing our best. But if you're online, you'll have a chance to ask questions at the end, and we'll ask them along with those of the live audience. We tend to try to start with some kind of a reading or quote or something about what humanism is or what our community is. And today I am choosing one that we've had a few times in the past, but it caught my eye today. From the Humanist Society of Western New York. Humanism is a joyous alternative to religions that believe in a supernatural God and life in a hereafter. Humanists believe that this is the only life of which we have certain knowledge, and that we owe it to ourselves and others to make it the best life possible for ourselves and all with whom we share this fragile planet. A belief that when people are free to think for themselves, using reason and knowledge as their tools, they are the best able to solve this world's problems. An appreciation of the art, literature, music, and crafts that are our heritage from the past, and of the creativity that, if nourished, can continuously enrich our lives. Humanism is, in sum, a philosophy of those who in love with life. I kind of love that, and also I just wish the word joy was there, because I think joy is important, but they didn't think of that. I forgive them. So today's speaker is Jen Walling. She has served as the executive director for the Illinois Environmental Council since January of 2011, where she oversees the strategic direction and management of the organization and lobbies decision makers on environmental issues. The council has grown dramatically during her tenure with regard to staff, budget, and affiliations. Jen has worked closely with Illinois legislators and their staff and with other stakeholders to pass hundreds of bills on a whole wide range of issues related to improving energy efficiency, protecting and supporting natural spaces, and promoting waste reduction initiatives such as composting, among others. For example, through her leadership, Illinois was the first state to ban microbeads in personal care products in 2013. She has a bachelor's and a master's degree in natural resources and environmental sciences from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and a law degree from the University of Illinois College of Law. Today, she's going to speak to us about protecting our planet, Earth Day and Every Day, as part of our series on the environment and in recognition of Earth Day next week. Please join me in welcoming Jen.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me this morning. I'm really delighted to talk to you, especially as we're entering into Earth Month, but April 22nd being Earth Day, but I know this is a crowd where you're probably thinking about these things all the time. Right now we're in the middle of a very busy Springfield legislative session, so I'm mostly going to focus on what we're doing there and just give you a few tips on how to be involved with it. But I want to tell you a little bit about the Illinois Environmental Council. We've been around since 1975. And we're unique because we're a coalition organization. So we have over 150, now I say 100, but we've been growing, 150 affiliate organizations that are members. And those members range from the Natural Resources Defense Council, which is international, to neighborhood organizations like Little Village Environmental Justice Organization. So a huge range of different organizations. Some of them work in one place, some of them work on one issue. Sometimes we have groups like the Respiratory Health Association that doesn't want to burn anything, and the Nature Conservancy that wants to burn the prairie. So there are, but we're a group that works on building the power of the environmental community, advancing the strongest environmental legislation that we possibly can. I got a few of the things that we do, but I want to compare just to start of what we do. I think of what we do, and this is a little corny, but I was on this podcast once about soil, and it really made sense to me. My undergraduate degree is in soil and water science. I've done a lot of soil testing before, and what I think of our group as doing is building the soil for the environmental movement. We're making sure that our state lawmakers are ready and willing to vote for environmental issues each and every time, and we're getting there and we're growing stronger and stronger. And organizations from across the state bring me ideas. They bring me the seeds that can grow in that really great soil. Got to make sure it's aerated, has enough organic matter, and is just ready for growing. So we want to make sure we have a healthy environment, a healthy environmental movement, and the power to move environmental legislation that we want to. I'm going to talk a little bit about the legislative session. I find it's a unique overlap with folks that care about the environment and folks that care about civics, and maybe you care about both of them, but often the political process is a mystery. And it's okay if you don't know a lot about civics. It's great if you do know a lot, but if it's okay if you don't, because there's a lot of pieces of this process that are designed to be mysterious to the public. And I see it as one of my jobs to make sure that people know how to enter into advocacy. And I'll start a little, I think, thinking about things in this room, I think there are probably a lot of environmental actions people here do. So things like composting, recycling, not buying items in the first place, walking, getting an electric car, public transit, all of these things. And I'm so delighted by the individual actions everybody does. Keep doing them. But I also want you to do the things and get frustrated by them. Because we all know with any of these things, often they are harder to do than the alternative. So the alternative that's bad for the environment, that's bad for public health, that's bad for low-income communities is often the easier default option that we're presented. And that's what we're working against. We want the default option to be the one that's pro-environment, that's good for low-income communities, that is good for our public health. So I want you to do those things, and I want you to get frustrated and understand that we need to work on action and policy to make sure that the environmental action is the default action, and it's the item that we want to move. So I'm going to talk a little about how we're doing that. And some of this is a long, frustrating process. So I have a few slides on how the Illinois State Legislature works. That's primarily where we do our work. We also have a very active City of Chicago lobbying program. And in my strategic plan, if we raise the money, I am hopeful at some point in time that we're going to be able to do a lot more city council lobbying for other city councils across the state. But now I'm approached by people who want help with development or environmental issues in their community, and most of the time we don't have capacity. But I'm working to get there. So today I'm going to talk about state legislation because it has such a profound impact on those individual actions that we want to take. So I have a little bit of a process summarized here. In Illinois, the state legislature moves things from one chamber to another, and maybe back if it's changed, and then to the governor. There are other states where you can have different bill numbers advance in a House and Senate and go up and get signed by the governor. We can't do that in Illinois. It's a linear process. It all has to have the same text. So when we're looking at this process, introduced in first chamber, committee, floor vote. Right now, the part where we're at, and I'm going to show you deadlines in a minute, is the Senate just had the floor vote deadline last Friday, and then the House's floor vote deadline of that first one is this next Friday, and then goes to the second chamber, committee, floor vote, concurrence if it's changed, and then the governor and law. But also this is what it looks like. Or actually this very, very similar diagram from the Legislative Reference Unit. And I find that I'm learning new things every year. There's new procedural moves that I see, and I'm like, I didn't know that could happen. I just had one happen last week. I've been in this role for 13 years. There's new things they do all the time. So this is just a little bit of what it can look like, and of course can be very confusing. So that's where we're trying to make this process simple so folks can understand where environmental legislation is. One of the first steps in being an environmental activist is knowing who represents you in the state legislature. In our state legislature, there's 118 members of the House of Representatives, 78 Dems, 40 Republicans, 59 senators, 40 Dem, 19 Republicans. There's 2 House members in each Senate district. There's no, it completely overlaps, so each Senate district does have 2 House seats. ILGA.gov has a legislator lookup tool. There are a lot of them online. If you think your state senator is Dick Durbin, it's not. That's your U.S. senator. So go and check it out. But that's okay. And I'm assuming a lot of you in this room know that, but I find it can be something that anybody at any level makes those errors. So making sure that you're looking at your state senator and your state representative and learning who represents you. So this is Laura Fine, who represents a lot of the North Shore and is the head of the Green Caucus in the state Senate. But there's a lot of information, like knowing about your lawmaker is important too. So this has contact information, committee assignments, biography, associated representatives. And when you think about talking to your lawmaker, thinking about what interests benefit them is really important. And of course, around here, we have a lot of people who support the environment. So anybody who's going to be north side of Chicago, North Shore, we got some great representatives up here, but we have to hold them accountable, and we have to make sure that they are hearing from their constituents. But also, you have a unique and important role in being able to contact people who are not in the area to get them to contact their lawmakers about these issues. But knowing what your lawmaker is interested in is really interesting. You know, for example, Laura Fine is the best. She's the best ever. But we just opposed one of her bills for the very first time because it was about mosquito abatement districts and spraying pesticides. And we ended up getting to a version that we liked, but that was difficult. But she knows that she has a lot of constituents that are a member of ours, and this mosquito abatement district needed to work with us to get to a final. So what you do is really important. Even if you think your lawmaker is going to do the right thing every single time, still important to contact them. And when I look at different types of lobbying that you want to do, the more personalized you are, the better. So I had you go learn about your lawmaker, you know, go follow them on social media, go to their coffees, learn about what they're interested in. I kind of have this encyclopedic knowledge of what different lawmakers are interested in. That really makes the difference when you're talking to them. But the more personalized your contact with lawmakers, the better. We often do forum emails, and I'll direct you to a few on our website of forum email alerts on things like wetlands or plastics. But the more personalized your note is to the lawmaker, the better. Include a bill number, tell your personal story about why this is important to you. Often those things end up on the House floor. I remember one time we were taking a whole bunch of lawmakers to the Springfield Farmers Market to give a tour and talk about policy that has influenced farmers markets. And there's a lot, actually, of policies that have been passed at the state level on farmers markets. Things like cottage foods that allow value-added produce products to be sold. Things like place of origin, different health and sanitation standards to standardize them between different counties. And so that has been something really impactful. And we were working on the bill that legalized growing hemp in Illinois. And we had this farmer who's just happened to be, we had his lawmaker on the tour, and the farmer told this story about how he really wanted to grow hemp to supplement his row crops and the livestock that he had, and why this is really important to his business. That lawmaker literally talked about that story on the floor that day when we called the hemp bill for a vote. So these things are important, and lawmakers will hear them and often tell them on the floor or remember anecdotally, this is why this is important to me. So the more personalized, the better. A little bit about what is a lobbyist and lobbying is advocacy. All of you can be advocates, all of you can be lobbyists, but maybe not registered ones, because that would mean you're spending more than $500 on it and you'd have to register with the state. But hopefully, you're not, you're volunteers that are doing this work. And lobbying is advocacy. And just a few points, I spend a lot of my time actually lobbying other lobbyists. So I'll meet with the Illinois Manufacturers Association, the Chemical Industry Council of Illinois, the Farm Bureau, spend a lot of time talking to them with varying relationships. Sometimes we always fight, sometimes we will agree on an issue. But these relationships matter. There's different types of lobbyists. So from our realm, we're considered do-gooder lobbyists, the nonprofit issue ones. There's business-driven, so those are folks that are within, so the Walmart lobbyist or the Uber lobbyist. Those are people who are hired by a particular industry. They may do more than one state. But there's also at this point, we have a lot of wind and solar lobbying. So there's an Invenergy lobbyist that represents the biggest wind company in the United States. So that can be somebody we work with a lot. And then contract lobbyists are people who are hired guns. They have great relationships, and they will take contracts from wherever. And those are also folks that we work with quite a bit. I want to start. I'm going to go now into legislation that I'm going to start with CEJA. and then go into some other items, because I want to show you where we can get, with a whole lot of work, but where we can get. Who here has heard of the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act? Okay, a few. Illinois in 2021 passed what we think is the boldest and most equitable climate bill in the nation. It's the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act. This was a really tremendous victory. Tens of thousands of people were involved in it. We spent several years on it, and I do want to say, while we lobbied this particular bill for 4 years, it was a 20-year effort leading up to it with different bills that have been passed along the way. But this is, a lot of times we sit there and we say, this is a step towards what we want to accomplish. It's a step towards what we want to accomplish. But with this bill, this is sort of the end of where we want to get, and there's going to have to be tweaks and strengthening, but it's not a big new bill that's going to come in the future. It's going to be tweaks to the existing one. So we got this. It's a really huge, big deal, and I want to tell you about it and the benefits that you can take from both this and the Inflation Reduction Act. So I'll talk about a few of those things. So this is a bill that puts Illinois on a path to 100% renewable energy by 2050, 40% by 2030, and 50% by 2040. It commits us to carbon-free energy by 2045, beginning the transition in 2030. That means closing the coal and natural gas plants. We have a path to close those. There's already some that have closed, and there are more that will be scheduled to close in the future. There are a couple of coal plants that are owned by municipal utilities that will take until 2045 because they were bought by cities like Winnetka and cities like Naperville bought this, and it's an investment, and hopefully we can get those to close earlier, but most of these things start closing sooner, so we're not going to see coal plants that are open within the state. This bill also has a lot of renewable energy credits for solar and wind. There's some really strong pieces for solar on schools. If you're involved with the school, between the federal and state tax credits and programs for schools, solar's a great time. It's a great time for schools right now. Community-driven community solar, so that's if you can't put solar on your roof, having these community solar sites where you can own a portion of the project, and then purchase, you own it, you get the benefits from it, but it's not on your home. And then renewable energy projects that are led by diverse contractors. Oh, this is out of order, I'm sorry. But this was the House and Senate deadlines for the year. So it's got the deadlines of where we're at, and I talked a little bit about that. April 5th was committee substantive deadlines. April 12th was is third reading in the Senate. So those are the items we're headed towards, with May 24th adjournment. So I don't know, that just got stuck in there. But another piece that we're really excited about with the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act is just transition. So thinking about the communities that have been worst impacted by pollution, environmental justice communities are typically Black and brown communities that are more low income, and that's where we put all of our pollution. We think about Alcohol Gardens, where People for Community Recovery, Hazel Johnson was the founder, and her daughter Cheryl Johnson is running it now. Alcohol Gardens is a low-income housing project, and it is in a toxic donut of lots of landfills, lots of industrial sites. They all locate right there, and those folks, in addition to the burdens that they're facing, are also facing the burdens of pollution that is impacting their health. So we thought a lot about, and we prioritized in an equal way, equity to environment when we worked on the just transition pieces. So it includes things that are grants for folks that are, when we close those coal plants, we have a worker bill of rights that says, you need to tell people in advance. We had in 2019, there were a couple of coal plants that closed literally 30 and 60 days before Christmas. And it's just, okay, you're out of a job, there's no more, bye. And we want to make sure that doesn't happen anymore. So there's advance notice, there's job training, there's job placement. These folks, co-workers, have an ability to get involved in the different worker hubs that we have. There's also new incentives to encourage renewable energy and storage at the existing plants. I talked about that equity program. We're behind on the workforce component, but it's well on its way now to creating 13 workforce hubs across the state. Community-based organizations will provide clean jobs training and a career pipeline. And there's a lot of, I don't know, I might be getting ahead in the slide, but I'm really excited about some of these programs here. In the Future Energy Jobs Act, which was passed in 2017, we included sort of a pilot to some of these jobs trainings programs. And we learned a lot of things. And that program was focused on people with employment barriers, like returning citizens from prison and former foster children. So it had a focus on those programs. This still has some of that focus, but a little broader. And we learned a lot from those job training programs. So for example, in this new bill, we have things on, if you enter into a union job training program, you become an apprentice. You're paid as an apprentice. A lot of people, especially in the Black and brown communities, are going into community college where they're paying for the program. So they have to pay to get the training. They're not getting a salary. How are they going to complete this while they also have to work? And so we have a lot of pieces that will provide things like boots and books and transportation and childcare to make sure that people can be successful in these programs. There's also programs that are for people in prison to get involved in the renewable energy industry and get jobs in solar and energy efficiency. So they're being trained while they are in prison. And so lots of programs to encourage folks to have career opportunities and get benefits from this, and contractor programs. There's a lot of contractors that are involved in renewable energy and making sure that there's programs available for diverse residents. We have a number of items on utility accountability. We've kind of maybe all heard about ComEd taking advantage of politics and ratepayers. So how do we make sure we're holding the utilities accountable to both renewable energy and rates? There's a number of pieces on clean transportation. This includes a beneficial electrification plan. So in addition to the things I talked about, so there is a $4,000 rebate for consumers for EVs. Unless you're applying the day it comes out, it's probably not going to be available. And in the future, it's probably going to go towards more low-income residents. But there is a $7,500 income tax rebate from the federal government right now for electric vehicles. And there's also a program from ComEd that for your residential charger will fund a huge portion of the cost if you are getting a charger in your home. So there's some really exciting incentives. And I should put this in here, but there's a site called Rewiring America that you can go to and type in all of your information. And that's my favorite site to look at things for businesses, for you as an individual. There's so much available. And if folks have questions on how to access some of those, I can give some little tips. But this is just, I wanted to talk to you today about, this is the big thing that can happen. And then I'm going to go through bills that are possible. But there's just so much right now on clean transportation. So with that, I want to go into, and I have maybe 20 more minutes here. Yep, I'm going to talk about what's happening this legislative session that you should be interested and excited about. So this year is an election year. March 19th was the primary. So the legislature is doing less. And the general election's November. I'm told nothing with a price tag is going to pass this year, so it might be veto session or lame duck, looking into 2025 on the things that we want to do. There's a huge number of bills that we track. We are tracking over 360 bills. We work to draft nearly 40 bills. There's going to be some budget issues. The budget is this year's budget is supposed to have a surplus, and next year's budget is supposed to have a deficit. So in looking at next year's budget, it's going to be a tight one, and we're going to have to figure that out. So that's just what we're going into with this year. So I put this first. I think the most important bill that I'm working on this year, and now it has a new bill number, but is this wetlands bill, which is now Senate Bill 771. And I can send, you can go to our website, there's an action alert. In all of the rollbacks from the Supreme Court, whether it's the Dobbs decision or other items, the Supreme Court rolled back protections on a lot of things. And one of the things that they rolled back protections on are isolated wetlands. They said that it's up to the states now to protect wetlands. These are not something that the EPA is allowed to regulate. And these are wetlands that are not located next to or near a navigable body of water. So this is maybe about 40% of wetlands. Wetlands are incredibly important. They're important to all of us because they're great for preventing flooding. This is an area that's been wet. This is where the water goes. They're intense filters of pollution. So, no matter what we're throwing into them, they are filtering that out and really cleaning up water as it goes through. They're really important for habitat, but these are critical. And we've destroyed 90% of wetlands in Illinois. And this bill only seeks to keep the wetlands in place in Illinois that were in place before the Sackett decision reversed all protections on wetlands in the state. There are 25 states that do individually protect wetlands, and we want those protections back. We're having a lot of progress on it. It's gotten out of committee in both chambers. We're ready. We almost have, I think we're at 25 sponsors in the Senate, and you need 30 votes. Of course, you need a little more than that to get things done, but we have a strong amount of support for this wetlands decision. So this is key. I'm going to go through a couple others that I think you should contact your lawmakers on, but this is the one we need to respond to the Trump Supreme Court and make sure that we're reversing what the Sackett decision did to wetlands and habitat in Illinois. This is the most important bill that I'm working on, spending a lot of time on it, and I'm really hopeful it's going to get done this year. So that one is exciting, the progress, but if we don't make progress, I'm going to be very nervous. We also, related, have a bill about the right to recreate on Illinois rivers. We're trying to clarify on public bodies of water people's ability to paddle and canoe and fish on navigable bodies of water. And now a few on energy that we're working on. We have a bill on a solar bill of rights that's going to stop municipalities from banning solar. That's still something that's happening these days, that it's your own property and they won't let you access solar. There's a few communities in the northern suburbs like this, or they'll do things like say, you basically need the Elon Musk's roof tiles. You can't do normal solar on your roof. And so really challenging. I don't like that. So we're going to try to fix that one. We're going to try to pass that one. We've already gotten on a committee, and we're maybe going to amend one more time, and then we're headed to the floor. We're also working a lot on carbon sequestration. You may kind of hear about this issue. This is where big polluting companies want to take the carbon and store it in the holes in our geology. We're concerned because I think that a lot of companies like BP or ADM are looking in Illinois and saying, oh, this is a great geology for carbon sequestration. Why don't we use Illinois as a dumping ground for all of the carbon from the Midwest? So they want to not only store the carbon there, but have carbon pipelines that are coming across and storing it. And then they want to store it, close it, and then give the liability to the state afterward so that we're all responsible for this carbon that they've stored in their pollution. We're not cool with that. Obviously, we have a couple of bills that are our own regulation and that are, there's a carbon pipeline moratorium. So those are a couple of bills that we're advancing. These are the numbers of those. And we're going to see what happens with that particular piece of legislation this year, but an issue you should be aware of. And I'll just real quick on carbon pipelines. What's really interesting on that I have learned about, so there have been now a couple of different disasters from carbon pipelines. And you're like, oh, like we all exhale carbon dioxide, whatever, the plants inhale it, we're cool. But no, carbon pipelines, there was a rupture in Sarsa, Mississippi, where it's just a whole bunch of carbon and carbon dioxide and no oxygen. And a number of people died in the small town where there was a rupture in the pipeline. And the other thing that you don't think about, or I didn't think about, is that a diesel engine cannot run if there's no oxygen. And so when all these rescue vehicles tried to drive into the area to rescue people, you also had rescuers dying because you can't run a diesel vehicle in something that has too much carbon dioxide. And so figuring out rescue efforts, like if these are going to go all across the state, you actually need an electric vehicle which can run without the oxygen to be your emergency vehicle in these areas. So really interesting piece, and we want to ban, we have a ban on the carbon pipelines or regulation of them, seeing what we can get through the legislature. We also are working a lot on transmission and capacity, making sure that there's more transmission to bring in the renewable energy and bring it across the state. We're also working a lot on removing natural gas and our transition off of natural gas in our homes. There is a big clean and affordable building ordinance in Chicago that if you haven't contacted your alderman yet, this is a really important one for new buildings and for changes to old buildings. So we're hoping to also move off of natural gas, which is a contributor to climate change. We're also working on defense of both CEJA and making sure that it's implemented correctly. I'm going to stop at some of these numbers. So I also am very excited this year, I think on this next slide, yeah. So we are working a lot on zero waste. And one of the things that we want to do is really ban some of the products that are plastics that I'm going to say can't easily be recycled, but can't be recycled. So when you think about styrofoam, which is this HB 2376, which we've gotten out of the House, it's in the Senate. We're hopeful that we're going to be able to move that one during veto session. We have banned styrofoam for state agencies. And so that ban takes effect January 1st of this year. So no more styrofoam purchased by the state. And we're hopeful that we can move restaurants and retailers off of styrofoam. Styrofoam is toxic in its creation. There's toxicity in its use. I mean, you know, it doesn't come with something that says don't microwave this, but we all know what happens when you microwave styrofoam with your food, and the styrofoam gets into your food and melts. And then, you know, there's supposed to be styrofoam recycling, but styrofoam can never become more styrofoam, and typically it's recycled by turning it into fuel or melted with a chemical to become something else. So really, really toxic, really challenging. And people think that you can put it into the recycling. There's, you know, DART has a few drop-off places, but they don't really want your recycling that or your food clamshells. They want your clean styrofoam. And then plastic bags, similarly, plastic bags, they're crowding our landfills. There's a huge percentage of litter that's out there. Oh, with styrofoam, you know, despite that they're like a 1% amount of what makes up our landfill, they can be 10 to 40% of what makes up litter when there's metrics on litter cleanup because they're just not ending up into the landfill, they're blowing. So it ends up being a lot of litter. Same with plastic bags. We're working on something that will ban plastic bags. We're finding we have now a number of communities that have a fee or tax on plastic bags in Illinois, and we're finding that a number of them didn't do that fee or tax in cooperation with environmental programs like the city of Chicago, so they're not doing anything to reduce the number of plastic bags. They're just getting more and more tax revenue off of it. So we'd like to see something that bans plastic bags in the future to protect marine animals and protect our food and water. We're working on that. Another issue you should be aware of is this perfluoroalkyl substances. We're working on making sure that this forever chemical that is in things like your, it can be in makeup, it can be in cookware, it can be in, things like car parts, but it can be in things that we have direct human exposure with, ends up in our bodies. We want to make sure that that isn't manufactured, doesn't end up in our water and our soil. And so we have a bill on a PFAS registry that we hope will lead to a ban that we think we're going to get done this year because Minnesota and Maine have already done it. And then we're working on composting and reducing methane emissions. I talked about the PFAS ones. We're also working quite a bit on lead service lines and replacing lead service lines in Illinois, and also on urban flooding to respond to increased flooding from climate change. Then another program that we have is on agriculture. So we're working on increasing local food infrastructure and decreasing the pollution from agricultural runoff through things like cover crops and sustainable farming practices. On pesticides, we have a ton of bills on pesticides, but I'll tell you, this is one where we have not gotten a lot of traction. Those pesticide companies, the landscaping companies, really want to just continue the full-scale use of pesticides. We're seeing a lot of tree damage from pesticides in the recent years, more than normal, and especially oaks that'll curl up. You know, even if you're seeing that within your own trees in your front yard, if you're seeing them, the leaves, in times when they're not supposed to be just sort of curling in and not looking healthy. It could be a pesticide that has gotten on that tree, and a few years of that will kill a tree. We're really worried about oaks, particularly in southern Illinois, and we're trying to work on increasing the penalties for damaging trees when spraying. So those are some of the bills we've got there. I will go to a little on transportation right now. We're really excited about the different transportation work that we're doing. And the transportation work involves public transportation. In Illinois, we're going to face a $1.5 billion shortfall starting in 2026 after the federal government subsidies from the pandemic go away. And we already know that our system is in crisis. We're really concerned about how the system is organized, whether it's done efficiently. You know, there are, for example, 3 different entities that buy buses. And if we want to electrify buses, it makes more sense to procure them all together and make sure that their chargers go together. How do we make sure the systems are working together? How do we make sure that it's efficient and that we're getting the best in terms of user services, et cetera? So we're working very heavily on public transit. And also walkability and active transit, making sure that it's safe. But then also, how do we make sure that we're electrifying the transportation sector more, but with a particular emphasis on things like trucks? So trucks are much cleaner than they used to be, but trucks, diesel pollution, every day a semi-truck is on the road, the engine is dirtier. So the diesel pollution, every day it's on, it's burning less, it's getting more particulate matter. There was just an article in the Tribune about how in certain communities, like Little Village, they'll count 1,000 trucks in a residential area on a corner in 24 hours. And so that's a huge amount of air pollution, and it's not regulated because, I mean, it's regulated from each individual truck, but nobody's getting an air permit to have 1,000 trucks in an area. And so it's something that we're not looking at. And so how do we electrify those trucks, especially the ones that are just going within areas that are environmental justice communities, ones that are maybe doing shorter distances rather than across the country. So how do we work on that? And that's a thing we have these advanced clean truck standards. And I talked about these pieces, and I just got these 2, and then I'll talk about some opportunities coming up. But we're also working quite a bit on environmental justice. So I've talked a lot about low-income Black and brown communities and the way that they're impacted by pollution. So there's actually even a map online that you can go look at and see areas that are environmental justice communities from it's called the Solar for All map. That's the map that we want to use to define environmental justice. We've been working with the governor's office and the Chicago Environmental Justice Network to define environmental justice area and require a cumulative impact analysis. Air is one area where we don't look at cumulative impact of pollution. So there's often ways, so with water, if you, there's waters that have total maximum daily load. So with different pollutants, it'll be looking at everybody in that stream that has a permit and making sure that all of the permits don't exceed that TMDL. So we'll look at that. And there's pieces too with land about siting to make sure that different land pollution isn't near each other. But with air, we just look at each factory permit by permit. And if they're really big air pollution permits, we're not looking at what else is in the area and whether it's making the air in that community unsafe. And it's a really expensive problem to people who live in that community because of asthma and other respiratory illnesses. So really challenging. We want to define environmental justice areas and require a cumulative impact analysis that could lead the permit to be denied and that project to not move forward. Similarly, we're working on air monitoring. One of the areas that I'm hearing from more communities about than anything else is about new trucking hubs. As we go to a more online system of purchasing our items, there are more trucks and there's more trucking hubs. And the trucking hubs want to locate in residential communities because they want to be by you where you used to have stores. And so then you have a lot of diesel pollution that are going in these areas. And there's not really anybody looking at that. We went out with the state lawmaker who represents the Joliet area and saw in Romeoville an area that was 10 miles by 10 miles of just warehouses, all brand new. And some of them, a half a mile by half a mile long, and diesel trucks, no public transit for the workers that are working there, and causing new and challenging environmental and social justice problems for the workers and the people who live in the area. So we're really interested in tackling that as well. So if any of these, any of these are things that you're interested in, we also have lobby days where you can come to Springfield. And our website is islandviro.org. We've got action alerts, so I definitely recommend talking to your lawmakers about wetlands, talking to them about plastic bags. These are all things that we need people to take action on. We've had one lobby day already, which was our soil health lobby day. We had a couple hundred people down. The big one we have is the Climate Action Lobby Day. I believe there's a bus that goes from Loyola, and that's going to be your closest one. But day trip, get on the bus, 7 a.m., you get there around 10 or 11, you leave around 2, you get to hang out with some awesome people, and you go and talk to your lawmakers. So we really need people. That is the best way, and you get really excited, especially if you're frustrated by anything that you've done on environment, and you're like, am I making a difference? It's really great to be surrounded by people who really care about these issues. So that one's important. April 30th, we have a conservation day at the Capitol. We're going to be working on wetlands and other conservation items. It's like Climate Action Lobby Day, and then Zero Waste Lobby Day, where we're going to be working on plastic issues. So those are some of the lobby days we have, and this is my staff, that's my email. So if anybody wants to contact me about any of these issues, I'm happy to go through any of it. But I think I'm ready now for questions.
So, news that you didn't know is that YouTube is down. So we weren't streaming. We just found that out after you started. So we are our private, intimate little selves here. Not in a weird way. And so we're going to have our interlude, and the idea of it is that we're going to take a minute to be quiet and think about some of the things that Jen has raised and formulate questions. And questions end with question marks. We'll talk about that again later. So we're going to have our musical interlude. As ever, we like to encourage people to donate. There's a basket in the back. I'll grab it if you want to put some dollars in. I'm not going to talk to people online because they're not there. And so after the interlude, I'll be back up and we'll ask questions of Jen. Thanks. So for those of you who wonder how we used to have lovely music during the interlude, and then we've had that for kind of a long time, it's because of the internet, and if we put lovely music, it gets blocked because we don't have all the copywriting things and all the things people get mad, which I appreciate. But I just wanted you to understand the why of it, and maybe it'll be less frustrating to you. So this is the time where we're gonna ask questions. That's a microphone, use it well. As I mentioned, questions end with question marks, so it's something you actually want to know about, and this isn't a time to have big thoughts. You can have them, but we'll share them with coffee later. And right now it's curiosity and things that Jen can address your curiosity. So come on up.
Jen, thank you so much for a great talk. I have a two-pronged question that has to do with plastics.
Yes.
I feel like I've heard in the last year something about this, and I'm not sure if it's true, that the triangle plastic mark that appears on plastic things was actually created by the plastics industry, and that. So my question is that true? Why is it that people aren't more aware that it was, what I've heard is that it was created by the plastics industry as a way for people to believe that plastics could be recycled and that all is well. So why hasn't the word gotten out more about that? And then the second part of my question is, what are the best strategies to reduce plastic? I know you referred back to the plastic bag ban, that we need to go to a plastic bag ban. But I think that charging for plastic bags was a good first step, because I think it got everybody not, bringing their own bags to the grocery store. So I'm wondering if you think that trying to get laws or ordinances passed in municipalities that would force extra charges for when you get plastic, either at takeout, or if that's the way to go. If that's the first step, is starting to charge for when you get plastic. So,
Yeah.
plastics question.
Thank you. This is one of my favorite topics, because definitely waste is an area where I came, but also depressing. I mean, there's definitely, more and more of it. I do get very concerned that there are a lot of pieces with the recycling system that were put in place to make us feel like less guilty for creating all the trash that we're creating. And so, we can just recycle the thing. A lot of people participate in wish cycling. So I wish this could be recycled, so I'm going to put it in the bin. And I do think that, as much as possible, that we can be reducing the plastic that we're bringing into our homes and reusing what we do have, of course, are the first steps. But I definitely recommend, number one, and yes, definitely the triangles are the plastic industry labeling the things and making people want to feel less guilty. But, 1 and 2 plastic, there is a market. It's not true. Even that is not true recycling, because 1s and 2s are not heated to a high enough temperature where that they can become, you can't take it from a milk jug to a milk jug. That can't occur, because you're not taking it to a temperature where it would be sanitized enough to become a milk jug. And there are chemicals involved in the process, et cetera. But 1s and 2s do have a market. They often, lots and lots of polyester is using recycled plastic in it today, but in other places where there's microfibers. So, just thinking about how we can reduce what's coming in. And of course, I talked at the beginning about how difficult this stuff can be, right? Because you don't have options, and you're at the store and you're gonna buy that box of cereal, it's got a plastic bag inside. You don't have the option easily to reduce it unless you're really working. And I will commend those of you, maybe it's not right for me to be telling you that it's hard, but it's hard to reduce plastic. And I'm doing a lot, I got shampoo bars, I got a conditioner bar, I'm using all products that came without packaging in my shower. I'm trying to choose the things that don't have any packaging when I'm going to the grocery store. I'm a huge nerd that will bring, and I love you if you're doing this too. I got a lot of plastic containers that I bring when I go out to eat. Every time I have a plastic container that is reused, I'm bringing with me to put my leftovers in, so I'm not getting whatever, a new one or that sort of thing. And I have lots of strategies for making sure that I'm bringing my own bag. I got some in my car. I got some on my little table next to where I would exit. So I got all those places. So as much as you can be doing that, but in the meantime, the more we can be working on policies that incentivize banning certain things. I mean, plastic bags are so bad for the recycling system because people, and this is one other thing that you can do. If you are recycling and you're putting any type of plastic bag, whether it's a trash bag or a plastic bag, into your recycling, please stop. Any type of film or wrap in this area does not go in there, and it gets caught up in the machine and they have to clean it out. Those don't go in there. You could, if you need to line your bag or something and just keep reusing it, or I don't line my bag at all, don't put bags in your recycling. It's the worst thing. But there's so much contamination, and most of that's because of plastic. So the more we can reduce them, the better in terms of that. But then we're also working on this extended producer responsibility bill that will incentivize and make it more expensive for people to be using the plastics, so that we can switch back to containers that are more recyclable, more reusable. That's an important piece. And I do think anything that we're doing on policy on bags is good. So like the fee is a good place to start if that's what your municipality wants to do. But I will, especially as we're looking statewide as a ban, Chicago, the first year that they did the plastic bag tax was $7 million. And when we were working with them on that tax, and it was a 40% reduction in plastic bag usage that first year. When we were working on them, we wanted them to put a certain amount towards environment. And we have a Department of Environment that's $1.8 million. That tax is bringing in $7 million. The plastic water bottle tax is bringing in $12 million. Zero of that is going towards environment or working to reduce people buying those things. And so instead, it's going towards pensions. Last year, the plastic bag tax brought in $18 million. And a lot of that is audits and the pandemic, but it's a lot of increased plastic bag usage. So while we do want communities to do something, and a bag tax is good, a ban is where we should be going, and maybe a tax on paper bags if the municipality wants to bring in revenue, because those are recyclable. But we're finding that communities are like, hey, here's some tax revenue for me. How can I make more tax revenue rather than reduce the amount of tax revenue? And while it might stop individual behavior for a little bit, I mean, when we're buying groceries now, 7 cents is not a lot when you're spending that much money on the increased price. So those are all the things, we're working on. I have some hope there, especially as we're looking towards what we're going to ban in the state that I think will happen like this year. I think there's some exciting stuff in front of us. So thanks for working on it. Yeah.
Hi there. My name's Wade. I'm visiting down from Minneapolis here. This might be a little adjacent to what you guys do, but right now we're running into some problems up there where Minneapolis isn't as built out as Chicago. So they're trying to pass all these plans to, allow multifamily homes, more dense urban core buildings so that we don't have to sprawl out as much and affect the environment. They're running into a lot of issues trying to repeal certain environmental statutes and laws and stuff that allow people to kind of say like, oh no, you can't build right now, we need environmental reviews, and it kind of stops all this progress we're trying to do. Do you guys run into any of these problems down here where, it's less about maybe urban planning here, but do you run into any sort of like, bad faith lawsuits and stuff trying to stop what you guys are doing, and how do you guys deal with that and maybe work around that,
Yeah, it's definitely a place now where I think there's a little bit where the environmental movement started as a lot of not in my backyard, and now we need to be moving to an area where we're saying yes in my backyard to a number of things that are development. Maybe not over like endangered species or conservation. We don't have the same, we don't have an environmental impact statement in Illinois at all. That doesn't exist. But there are things, similarly, we passed a law that said counties can't ban solar and wind farms because we are seeing a ton of counties for political anti-Trump reasons be like, nobody can have wind in this county. So we passed some things there. But now I think we need to be yes in my backyard things and promote those. So like with the dense housing things, I know there's a big movement towards reducing parking mandates when you're doing dense housing. So not parking minimums when you're building housing. And that's something that is very helpful with getting more housing in, particularly in areas where you want to have public transit. And I just really, I admire the work Minnesota is doing on transportation. We definitely want to copy that. I think that's going to help with housing too. But yeah, I think there's a real shift in this movement where we do have to say yes and figure out how to get there rather than being the no. But yeah, I agree with you on that. Yeah.
Should have moved this out before. Yeah, we're all very much for electrification of vehicles. 45 years ago, friends and I built electric motorcycles, so I'm all for this, okay.
Yeah.
But there's been a lot of discussion for heavy trucking and shipping and airplanes too about hydrogen, either straight use of hydrogen or hydrogen-based synthetic fuels. So where do you see that fitting in, as opposed to, say, putting 5 tons of batteries in a truck?
Yeah. I mean, I think that especially when it comes to trucking, there's going to be a variety of fuel sources that we end up going towards as we work to reduce carbon, right? So I think when we look at electrification, my thing on electrification is especially replacing medium trucks that are going short distances within, within the city of Chicago. If you're a furniture delivery, yeah, go electrify. That's awesome because you can go home and you've done your deliveries, you go charge, you had enough. But I think there's also a place for, there's going to be some renewable diesel when we're looking at that. That's not my preference when it comes to fuel types, but I think that is a place California is looking at. I think that's a place we're going to go. And definitely hydrogen. We've supported a lot with hydrogen, but we want to make sure that there are real oversight to make sure the source for the hydrogen is coming from. And you guys will hear about, and I'm always learning about new colors of hydrogen. No, I mean, it's not an actual color of it, but hydrogen is labeled with colors. So green hydrogen is generally the hydrogen from wind and solar. Pink or red is generally nuclear. And then blue hydrogen is generally fossil fuels, but then there are a number of other colors, like in the entire rainbow of hydrogen. And there's definitely a place for hydrogen. There's definitely a place for liquefied natural gas in manufacturing, because there are going to be places that are hard to decarbonize. And I definitely see the trucking industry as having all of those, but we just need to make sure when we're looking at hydrogen, we're not just burning some coal and turning it into, and then making hydrogen from the fossil fuels.
Which is where most of the hydrogen comes from right now.
Yeah, right now,
Yes.
but eventually, that's the place where I would like to see us get is, maybe more towards the green. I know we're going to have a lot of pink in Illinois. So how do we make sure that we're having oversight over that eventually? So, yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I appreciated your presentation, and you obviously have a lot going on, and I can't say that I committed it all to memory, but I'll do the best that I can to follow
Me
up.
neither.
My question relates to, I do a lot of work in the community around sustainability, and there are 2 questions that usually come up, and one of them is the economics of the transition, that's one. But there's also a cultural aspect to it, and a lot of times, like when we're talking about plastics or shopping or, things that people do, parking, it's like, well, the question comes up, how do you preserve the way people are used to doing things and make it sustainable? And it's always, for me personally, it's always a very difficult thing because the short answer is you don't. We do have to change the way we do things, and we can actually make things better by doing things different, but it's very difficult to have that question. Or have that conversation because it's not, people aren't sort of oriented to thinking in that way. In your experience, how much of it is a cultural resistance or, the sort of battling that cultural kind of inertia, and how much of it is economic? And when it comes to that kind of cultural or sort of lifestyle conversation, is there a message or is there a way that you have that conversation, you're able to reach people?
Yeah, that is a really great question, and it goes to, I think a bit of what I want to work towards, because I think some of that in changing behavior and cultural mindset, it's just there's some portion that'll occur, there's some portion of voluntary work that'll occur, but the real amount that we need is going to require us to make the sustainable option as easy, as cheap, and possible. And I think it's, we really need to think about, and I'm big on the message, like, are we paying for these things with dollars, or are we paying for these things with our health and our lungs and our education, our criminal justice system? It's the money is coming from somewhere, and is it currency or is it our health that we're paying with? And how do we compare, those type of things? Like somebody's paying for it when there's pollution that's going into the air for free. Somebody else is paying for that, and we have a cost. And how do we keep talking about that? And which dollars do we pay for the solution for? But I do think, and I think when we look at the policy changes that have happened, now we see a ton of solar, right, being built all the time. I mean, not enough, but I even go far downstate, and there's so much solar, especially in the last few years. And that really had to do with economic incentives and making it something that really made economic sense to people, so it was easier to do. So that's where the role that policy comes in. And of course, the culture needs to meet the policy, because if lawmakers advance something that people are really unhappy with, those lawmakers are not going to get reelected. So it needs to be that approach that moves the item in a way that meets it. So I often look at kind of a spectrum of policy, right? There's removing regulatory barriers, so making the action much easier. Like, for example, on personal containers, I passed first a law that said if you want to bring your own container, public health departments can't prohibit that. And then we passed a law that has said that gives restaurants and retailers health standards for if they want to use consumer-owned containers. So there are health standards now in Illinois, and we got to do education on that, where if you want to use your own container, if the restaurant's cool with it, you can give it to them. They can even package it behind the counter, but they have to follow the health standards, which are different sanitation and cross-contamination standards. So they have to do that, and then you can use your own container, but the restaurant has to agree to it. But that's only going to get us so far. So there's eventually a place where you kind of would have to mandate it or make it easier. So there's sort of that spectrum of removing the barriers. One of the items on there, the more local governments do these things, the better too, because they're a really big purchaser of items, and if they do it, they can make things cheaper for everybody else. So that's sort of the spectrum that I look at, is how do we go from voluntary to mandatory to bring in the people who aren't adopting that practice. But we got to make these things easier. I mean, I would love to say we can really change culture, but I think that it's going to have to be that slow process that people understand the change is not going to cause them loss, because that's really what people are afraid of. So that's what I want to work on, and that's where I see these things being successful. So thank you for the question.
Hi, I had a question about grassroots advocacy tactics, and I think it was slide 6 or 7, one of those. You had a bar graph, and it showed different kinds of actions people could take. So, we have an ethical action committee as part of our society, and I know from a past speaker who represented a similar group in Minneapolis, he talked about how their committee would have in their coffee hour bright yellow cards that everyone could fill out a postcard and mail it in. But that was one of the lower ranked actions, those sort of stock cards. So I guess one of the higher ranked actions was constituents speaking on behalf of a group of constituents. So I wondered if you could explain a little more about the chart. Was it like a survey of legislators or that? And then also, what advice would you give to a group like ours? Is it better to channel our energy into sort of everybody fill out a postcard, or is it better to channel energy into let's as a board write a letter on behalf of the group representing our membership?
Yeah, so this is from a congressional study. I need to cite it. It's a congressional study from about 2018. So there's some like updates to this. Like you will notice this doesn't have social media on it, which I think is a valuable way to now contact your lawmakers, depending on how you do it. Comments and social media sites is on here, but I think it's more valuable. But this was a study from congressional staffers. So U.S. congressional staffers were asked to rank what is valuable. And you'll see there's like the gray bar and the black bar. So there's still value. I mean, I'm not sure form faxes, for example, are valuable anymore because some lawmakers just don't have faxes. But I think even the form email messages and the postcards do make a difference. I like postcards because they are real and they, like a real person did this and they weren't just like auto-generated, and a lot of lawmakers might see that and they get these notes, and then you know, the lawmaker will contact them to be like, can you tell me more? And then they're like, I'm not a real person. So like there's some of that astroturfing going on too. So the more personal it is with like real people, real addresses, I think that's very valuable. I think letters from an organization can make a difference, but it's still going to make more of a difference to your local lawmaker. So, you know, Senator Villavalam out here might, you know, listen to this is something in his district, et cetera. But the more personal you make it, the better. So like when you're doing those postcards, leaving a spot to like write a few sentences about why this is important, you know, and I know that can make it a little harder, but leaving some space and writing that in, like you're a real person, you're telling the story, this is why this is important to you. That makes it more and more. And at the state level, it's a little different than Congress. I would say that if a lawmaker gets 10 contacts on a particular issue that they're certain are real people, it makes a difference. And, you know, it might not be that they get back to you, but like for me, it's huge. So, you know, when I'm out lobbying, a lawmaker will walk up to me and be like, I just got all these emails about bobcat hunting. What the heck is this? You know, so they'll ask me. I'll even get stuff forwarded from like national groups that I didn't initiate the action alert, and I can tell them what the thing is. But I'll tell you a really powerful story. We're in this committee about this public-private transportation project that was going to help, it was going to increase a highway in an environmental justice area. And right before the committee, we hand-delivered a whole bunch of the form email messages. We printed them out and delivered them to people on the committee. And a senator on the committee like walked in with this stack of like 65 letters from her constituents, and she just is like waving it around as she's talking like, all of these people in my district don't want this bill. I think I need to vote no on this. And so like those do make a difference. You know, just like keep doing it. And I even love like when a lawmaker goes to me and they're like, I gotta call my constituent Barb from the Sierra Club to make sure what you're telling me is accurate. And they're great, that's so great. I know Barb, she's gonna give you the right info. Like we're besties, and I love the local verification. I would rather lawmakers vote with somebody that is in their district that's a constituent. And like kind of unfortunately, I mean, most lawmakers are influenced by their constituents. I know which ones aren't. I know who they are, and I know like tactics I've got to take to maybe do more direct lobbying or bring other voices in. Because there are lawmakers, I could bring 20 people from their district to a lobby day, they're like, I'm not available. Like really, these are, but that is the thing that happens. But most of them makes a difference. So the more personalized, the better. Keep at it with the postcards. It's awesome. Thanks for doing it.
My question is related to a comment you made about not using liners. And I was wondering if that may not be acceptable to everybody, but what about compostable plastics? Mm-hmm. Is there any value to that?
Yeah, well, compostable plastics, I mean, you know, it's complex. Compostable plastics, no film should go in your recycling bin ever. No film goes in there. So whether it's a plastic bag, a garbage bag, you know, the liner of your cereal box, plastic wrap, does not go in your recycling bin. You know, there's other things that contaminate, but that's kind of one of the worst things. So even a compostable liner, it's not going to biodegrade by the time that it gets to the material recovery facility to sort the recycling. So just, you know, dump it out, and then, you know, if you need to compost or throw away the liner somewhere else, do that. You know, you really should not be putting those bags in your recycling. But of course, I think it's happening a lot of times. They're dealing with it. It's not the end of the world, but I highly recommend not putting that in there. I do think, you know, compostable products can make a difference, and there's some biodegradation, but, you know, with landfills, by the time an item gets into a landfill, there's no air, there's no water, there's no microbes, there's some toxic substances. So there's people who have done research on landfills that have dug in and found a hot dog that's 40 years old that nothing has happened to. So as much as you can be pairing, like I definitely would buy compostable items over other things because it helps the market. But the more you can compost the compostable items, the better. And for those of you who want to spend, there are a lot of at-home composting options in the area now, whether it's Collective Resource, Urban Canopy, I have block bins. I think that might just be Chicago, but if you're in Chicago, block bins, places to compost. But my piece on the liner is never put that in the recycling. Just empty the recyclables into the can straight in there. You should be making sure your recyclables are pretty clean when you're putting in there so there's not food contamination. And then put the liner in the trash. So, thank you.
Hi, Jen. It's so great to hear you. I'm so glad I came, and I'm
Yeah.
just thrilled of all the good work you're doing. I am wondering how important or strategically, how does it impact, if at all, what your efforts are that towns and cities have their own sustainability plans, and how many of the cities and towns in Illinois have those? Just, you know, I think Evanston has a strong one, and Skokie has a strong one. So just wondering where you see those fitting in and how prolific they are through the state.
Yeah. I love it. I love when a community has a sustainability plan and they're doing some work on it. And, you know, I started at the beginning with, you know, we're doing state level lobbying in city of Chicago because those are really impactful. But like one of my dreams, if we raise the money, will be to lobby local elected officials more frequently. And we do have a municipal engagement manager on staff, Angela Shu. And Angela, her job is to talk to communities about how they're using Inflation Reduction Act funding or how they could be using it. So both like getting stories and winning the win and then talking to them what's available, because there's new tax incentives that are really powerful for municipalities on climate reduction grants and other items. And so municipalities have more incentives than ever. So I do think, you know, any level of government that is doing, because like, you know, when we're talking about sustainable action, it just gets easier, right? Like if you're putting panels on your home, you're spending all that money yourself. If a whole group of people are getting together and buying a community solar project for the community, that makes it a lot more easy and affordable to you. Or if the community has a plan that's going to reduce it, that's where I'm talking about like the default option is sustainability, because that community is making these items easier for you to access. And so really important, there's some really great elected officials, and there's really a lot of possibility there. But there's also a piece, you know, like for example, there's 102 counties in Illinois. While we are a state that is very heavily pro-environment and democratic, when you look at county elected officials, there's so many of them, they're very heavily conservative. And so getting more local governments to do these beneficial things, I think, is really critical. I want to get there. And like I said, I'm raising the cash to see where I can get to support communities more on this. But I love it. I love local action. Love what they're doing. Thank you.
I have all sorts of questions, but I'm going to give you 2 quick questions.
Okay.
As you were giving your talk, I was thinking about all my family members that should see this, because we really kind of live in a bubble. And then I was dashed when I heard that the YouTube failed. And there will be a video. Oh.
Good.
Okay, that's answer to question number 1. Question number 2 is about landfills in general. It seems to me like we don't have an infinite capacity for garbage, and how much of our land is going into landfills, and how sustainable is it?
Yeah, landfills. This is where I started a lot of my work too. So we have approximately 20 years of landfill life left in Illinois based on the planning, which is actually a lot. Illinois actually has a lot, like it's hard to put in a landfill, but Illinois actually has a lot of landfill capacity compared to other states. And that's why you might see like New England or California moving forward faster than us. We have really cheap landfill tipping fees. They're the cheapest in the Midwest. So all the states around us are charging more money to bring tons of garbage to landfills. We have space. We could put landfills within Illinois. And that also disincentivizes us from doing more recycling or composting. And so I think we should be charging more for trash to make sure that we're incentivizing more diversion in other ways. So I think that's a piece, and I'll say that. And you know, we do have a lot of sanitary lined landfills. Trash in this area is either going to Ogle County, Northeast Indiana, or Pontiac down 55. There's a lot of trucking and transportation involved in the waste industry, you know, because like your stuff is being picked up at your house, but that trash is not going to the landfill in that same dumpster that's picking up from you. It's going to a transfer station and then maybe another transfer station, and then it's going over to the landfill so that it's more larger and economical load for those folks. So yeah, like I think we actually in Illinois comparatively have a lot of space, and we should up those fees and get stuff out of there. So
I'm
so
gonna
my
take,
goals. Yeah.
I'm gonna take the last question.
Okay.
And it's not well formed in my head, but how do we balance our ignorance about what the long run solution really needs to be? I feel like the technology has changed so fast, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we are promoting, you know, these guidelines for fuel efficiency or, you know, renewables, whatever. I imagine that in 15 years, there's a thing we don't know yet, which is actually the better answer.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you balance supporting science to innovate and get us even smarter while at the same time putting into effect these middle term solutions and things like that? Is there a tension
Yeah.
there, and how do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, like tech is definitely a really interesting piece here. Because, you know, I even like get lobbied by companies all the time that are like, I'm going to create the newest renewable energy from potatoes. And I'm like, first off, I don't know. I don't know why you're talking to me. Like, you know, just start off with your investors and like get it moving forward so you can pilot it. Like, I don't know. And so I think, you know, there's definitely like, we may see different technology that gets us there. But the piece I'm concerned about is definitely the lack of support for not only research and development and that new tech, but inquiries into different types of technology. So in Illinois, we used to have an Institute of Environmental Quality that literally did its own science about different toxic chemicals or the emissions of different items, and then provided it to our pollution control board to make decisions. That's been gutted, and there's still there's I think something similar at the US EPA that's also been gutted a bit. So like we're not doing our own government research. We're not funding that anymore, and you know, that's a concern for me, because like how are we going to get unbiased information about the emissions that are coming from new things? Like I don't talk a bunch about, but like there's a lot of places that want to do burning plastic. I mean, they want chemical recycling, which is burning plastic. It's just another way of saying we're going to burn the plastic. And you know, the companies will come to me and like, look at this emissions profile. There's no mercury in here. There's no heavy metals. Like, of course there's not. But show me your dioxins. Show me your PCBs that are coming out of this type of fuel that you're burning. And they just never respond to my email inquiries on those. But, you know, how do we get somebody that can really tell us those answers and that we can trust? I know a lot of national groups are doing work into that, but that used to be a government function, and that's not being done anymore, and that does frighten me a little bit.
Yeah,
So,
thank you.
great,
Thank you
thank
so
you.
much. For details on upcoming programs on these and other activities, see our website at ethicalhumanistsociety.org. Connect with us on Facebook and Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel if you can, for videos of past speakers and future streaming options, our programs. We like to close with a quote, and I picked one from one of my favorite outdoor writers, Edward Abbey, who wrote a book long ago called Desert Solitaire about southern Utah. The love of wilderness is more than a hunger for what is always beyond reach. It is also an expression of loyalty to the earth which bore us and sustains us, the only paradise we shall ever know, the only paradise we ever need, if only we had the eyes to see. Thanks.